It was Christmas Eve, and the city streets glowed with lights, music, and people rushing home with shopping bags. Every window seemed warm and golden, every store filled with laughter. But for one man, the joy outside didn't reach his heart. Daniel drove slowly through the snowy streets, his car heater humming softly. He had just left the company's big charity gala, where everyone had been celebrating the success of another profitable year. People had clinked glasses, made toasts, and smiled for photos beside the tall Christmas tree in the hotel lobby. He had smiled too, because that was what people expected from him. But inside, there was an emptiness he couldn't hide from himself. He was a successful businessman, a millionaire by most measures, but tonight he didn't feel rich. He felt alone. His little girl, Lily, was spending the holidays with his mother this year. She had begged him to come with her, but he'd said he had important work to finish before Christmas. Now, driving home through the quiet streets, he realized the work hadn't been that important at all. Snowflakes brushed across his windshield like tiny sparks of light. For a moment, he slowed down near the park where he used to take Lily to feed the birds. The benches were covered in snow. He could almost hear her laughter echoing in his mind. When he stopped at a small convenience store to grab some milk and maybe a last-minute toy for her, he noticed something outside that made him pause. Near a trash bin by the diner next door, a woman was kneeling. She was bundled in a torn coat, her hair tucked under a wool hat that had clearly seen better days. He watched as she carefully pulled something out of the trash bag, what looked like a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. Daniel froze. He had seen homeless people before. Everyone in the city had, but there was something different about her. It wasn't just the sadness of her situation. It was the way she moved, almost carefully, like someone who didn't belong there. Like she was ashamed but desperate. For a few seconds, he just sat in the car, staring. He could have ignored it. He could have driven away, like most people would. But something stopped him. He took a deep breath, got out, and walked toward her. The cold air bit at his face, and the sound of carolers singing from across the street filled the distance between them. "Excuse me?" he said softly. The woman turned quickly, startled. Her eyes were clear, though tired. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'll leave soon." "No," Daniel replied gently. "You're not bothering me. I just saw you out here. Are you okay?" She hesitated, clutching the small sandwich like it was gold. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just needed something to eat." He reached into his pocket and pulled out some money. "Here, please. Get something warm inside." But she shook her head immediately. "No, thank you. I don't want money." That caught him off guard. "You don't want money?" She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Money's not what I need right now, just food. And maybe a little warmth." He didn't know what to say. Most people would have taken the money and left. There was a quiet pride in her voice, something that didn't match the situation she was in. "Well," he said after a moment, "come inside then. Let me buy you dinner. It's cold out here." She looked toward the diner, then back at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said softly. "But I want to." After a few seconds, she nodded and they walked together toward the small diner. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The warmth hit them immediately, along with the smell of coffee and freshly baked pie. They sat in a booth by the window. The woman kept her hands close to herself, as if afraid someone would notice she didn't belong there. The waitress came over with a polite smile. "What can I get you, hun?" The woman looked uncertain. "Just soup, please. And maybe some bread." Daniel spoke before she could finish. "And a hot chocolate, too. It's Christmas Eve." The woman smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while until the food arrived. Daniel watched her hands tremble slightly as she lifted the spoon. It was clear she hadn't eaten properly in days. After a few minutes, she looked up and said quietly, "You don't have to stay." "I'll be fine," he smiled a little. "If it's all the same, I'd like to stay. It's been a long time since I had company on Christmas Eve." She gave him a curious look. "Someone like you? Alone on Christmas? Someone like me?" he asked. She gestured at his suit. "You look successful. Like you have everything," he chuckled softly. "That's what everyone thinks. But sometimes having everything doesn't mean much when there's no one to share it with." For the first time, she smiled. A real one this time. "I understand that." They talked for a while quietly, like old friends. She told him her name was Grace. She had once worked as a nurse. She loved her job, helping people, caring for them. But life had taken a turn she couldn't control. Her husband had fallen ill and the medical bills had drained their savings. After he passed away, she couldn't keep up with the rent. She lost her apartment, her job, and eventually everything else. "I've been trying to get back on my feet," she said softly. "But it's hard. You need an address to get a job, and you need a job to get an address. It's a circle that never ends." Daniel listened without interrupting. Every word she spoke carried a quiet pain, the kind that doesn't shout but lingers. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "That must have been impossible to go through," she nodded. "I just keep hoping something will change. I didn't plan to end up like this. No one does." He looked at her for a long moment. Her coat was torn at the sleeve. Her shoes looked too thin for the snow. Yet there was a calm dignity in her, a strength he couldn't ignore. When she finished eating, she thanked him, stood up, and said, "You've already done too much. I should go." "Wait," he said, standing too. "You don't have to go back outside tonight. There's an inn nearby. Let me get you a room for the night." "Just one night. No strings." She shook her head immediately. "I can't accept that." "You've already bought me dinner. Please," he said gently. "It's Christmas Eve. Nobody should be out in the cold tonight." She looked down, silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Just one night," she whispered. He paid for the meal and walked her outside. The snow had thickened, falling in slow, steady flakes that glistened under the streetlights. They drove to a small inn a few blocks away, one Daniel sometimes donated to during his company's winter drives. At the front desk, he booked her a room for a week. She stared at him wide-eyed. "A week?" he nodded. "You'll need a few days to get warm, maybe make some plans." She was quiet for a long time before whispering, "Why are you doing this for me?" He paused, thinking. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. And I never forgot." That seemed to touch her deeply. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "Thank you," she said softly. He handed her a small card before leaving. "That's my company's number. If you ever need help finding work, call me. I can connect you with people who'll give you a fair chance." She took it gently, her fingers brushing his. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise me you'll call," he said with a small smile. She nodded. "I will." As he walked back to his car, Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just pity, it was respect. That woman, despite everything she'd lost, still carried herself with grace and honesty. Driving home, the world looked a little different. The lights seemed warmer, the snow quieter. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone. When he reached his house, he turned off the engine and sat there for a while, thinking about her words. "You need an address to get a job, and a job to get an address." He realized how fragile life could be, how a few bad days could change everything. He thought about Lily, asleep at her grandmother's house, safe and warm. He thought about Grace, alone but still trying. Before going inside, he looked up at the sky. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, catching the soft glow of the streetlights. He whispered to himself, maybe Christmas isn't about gifts or parties. Maybe it's about being human again. He didn't know then that this small act of kindness would change both their lives forever. But that night, for the first time in years, Daniel went to bed with a quiet smile. The kind that comes from knowing you did something right, even if no one else would ever know. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the city in white. Somewhere across town, in a small room at the inn, Grace sat on the bed staring at the business card in her hand. She placed it carefully on the nightstand, whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, and closed her eyes. Neither of them knew what the next day would bring. But something had begun, something simple, kind, and real, on a cold Christmas Eve when two lives crossed paths by chance. And that was enough to make the night feel a little warmer. The morning after Christmas Eve was quiet. The streets were almost empty, covered in a blanket of soft snow. Inside his large modern house, Daniel sat by the kitchen window, holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His thoughts weren't on the presents under the tree or the messages on his phone. They were somewhere else, with the woman he'd met the night before. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He had met hundreds of people through his business, investors, partners, clients. But that short meeting in front of the diner had touched him more deeply than all those polished conversations combined. Her eyes, the quiet strength in them. The way she had refused money, even though it had left a mark on him. He looked around the room. Everything was neat and beautiful. The furniture was expensive, the kitchen spotless, the floors shining. But it all felt empty, like a hotel instead of a home. He realized it had been years since laughter had filled this place. When his phone buzzed, it was a message from his mother. "Lily wants to show you the snowman she made. Call when you can." He smiled faintly and replied with a heart emoji. He missed his daughter, but he also knew that if he had gone with her, he never would have met that woman, Grace. Her name suited her. He pulled out his phone again and stared at the company contact card he had given her. He wondered if she'd call. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she didn't trust him. And honestly, he couldn't blame her. People in her position had been disappointed too many times. Still, he hoped. The next few days went by quietly. He went back to work after the holiday, but his mind wasn't fully there. Meetings came and went, reports piled up, yet something in him had shifted. He began noticing things he used to overlook. The security guard at the office who always smiled but looked exhausted. The janitor who worked late hours alone. The receptionist who skipped lunch most days. He found himself wondering about their stories too. Then, on the third day after Christmas, his assistant walked into his office. "Sir, there's someone in the lobby asking for you," she said. "Did they give a name?" He asked, already half distracted. "Yes," the assistant replied. "She said her name is Grace." Daniel froze. He stood up so quickly that his chair rolled back and hit the bookshelf. He didn't even fix his tie or grab his coat. He just hurried out of his office. When he reached the lobby, she was there, the same woman from that night. Her coat looked a little cleaner and her hair was tied neatly, but she still looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept much. "Grace," he said with a warm smile, "I'm glad you came." She gave a small nod, holding his business card between her fingers. "I wasn't sure if I should," she said softly. "I didn't want to bother you." "You're not bothering me," he said. "Please come to my office." She followed him upstairs, looking around nervously at the glass walls and the people in suits. Once they were seated, he asked gently, "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was thin. "Thank you for helping me that night." I stayed at the inn. It was warm. "I got some rest. I'm glad," he said sincerely. "Did you eat properly? Do you need anything?" She shook her head. "I'm fine. I came because you mentioned helping me find work. I don't want charity. I just want to work again." He nodded. "That's exactly why I wanted you to come." She handed him a worn folder, her resume. It was creased at the corners and the paper was yellowed. "It's old," she said quietly. "I used to work as a nurse. I had good references once, but after everything that happened, I lost touch with them." He read through the papers carefully. The list of hospitals and clinics, the training certificates, the years of experience. It all told a story of someone who had worked hard, who had once had stability and pride in her profession. "You were good at what you did," he said, looking up. "I tried to be," she said. "I loved helping people. But after my husband passed, I couldn't keep up. I lost everything little by little." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. "I just need a chance. Any chance." Daniel thought for a moment. "I don't have a medical department in my company," he said slowly. "But I do have a position that requires someone responsible and detail-oriented. It's not nursing, but it could be a start." Her eyes lit up with hope. "What kind of work?" "Administrative," he explained. "Helping with employee files, managing internal communication, assisting with our community projects. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and you'd be good at it." She hesitated. "Wouldn't people wonder why you're hiring someone like me?" He smiled kindly. "Let them wonder. Everyone deserves a new beginning." Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly looked down. "I don't know how to thank you. Just promise me you'll do your best," he said. "That's all I ask." "I will," she whispered. He called his HR manager and asked her to process the paperwork immediately. By afternoon, everything was set. Grace would start work in 2 days. That evening, Daniel drove her back to the inn. Before she stepped out of the car, she turned to him and said, "You don't know what this means to me. No one has looked at me the way you just did in a long time, like I still mattered." "You do matter," he said simply. "You always did." For a second, their eyes met. There was no pity there, only understanding. Two people who had both known loneliness in different forms. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself looking forward to seeing her around the office. She came in early, dressed neatly in modest clothes she had bought with the small allowance he'd given her. She worked quietly but efficiently, never complaining, always polite. The staff noticed her too. At first, a few people whispered, curious about where she had come from, but soon everyone grew to respect her. She was kind to everyone, even the ones who ignored her. One afternoon, Daniel's daughter Lily visited the office. She ran into Grace near the elevator and immediately liked her. "You smell like cookies," Lily said with a giggle. Grace laughed softly. "That's because I had one before lunch." They talked for a few minutes, and when Lily went to find her father, she said, "Daddy, that lady downstairs is nice. She smiles with her eyes." Daniel couldn't help but smile at that. Over time, he began to notice how Grace was changing, and how he was too. She had started bringing coffee for her coworkers in the morning, organizing small gestures of kindness that made the office feel warmer. People who had once kept to themselves now smiled more often. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel found her still at her desk, sorting through donation requests for a charity event. "You don't have to stay late," he said. "I don't mind," she replied. "I like helping." He leaned against the doorway, watching her work. There was something peaceful about her presence, a quiet strength that made everything around her seem softer. "Grace," he said gently, "you've done more for this place in a few weeks than you realize." She looked up, confused. "I haven't done anything special." "You have," he said. "You reminded us that people matter more than profits. That's something we all forget sometimes." She smiled shyly, her eyes glistening. Maybe we both needed reminding. He didn't say anything after that, but he knew she was right. The days turned into weeks, and winter slowly began to fade. By then, Grace had become part of the team, respected, valued, and quietly admired. One morning, as Daniel walked into the office, he noticed a group of employees helping her set up boxes for a new charity drive. The sight made him pause. A woman who had once been invisible to the world was now the one bringing people together. That night, as he drove home, he realized something simple but powerful. Helping her hadn't been an act of charity. It had been a reminder of what humanity really meant, and for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of his world alone. He didn't know where their paths would lead, or how deeply their lives would intertwine in the future. But he did know one thing for sure. That small moment of kindness on a snowy Christmas Eve had been the start of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. And sometimes, that's how life works. The people we least expect to meet end up changing everything. As he turned off the lights in his office that night, Daniel smiled to himself. Somewhere down the hall he could hear Grace's laughter, soft, genuine, and full of life. It was the sound of hope returning, and that sound stayed with him long after the building went quiet. The weeks after Grace started working at the company brought quiet but powerful changes. At first, no one paid much attention to her. She kept her head down, finished her tasks, and spoke only when needed. But soon people began to notice the small things she did. The way she remembered everyone's names, how she brought extra coffee for the night shift, or how she stayed behind to help others finish their work. There was something steady and peaceful about her presence. She never complained, never demanded attention, and never forgot to say thank you. It was as if her kindness filled the air, softening even the hardest corners of the office. Daniel noticed it too. He often watched from his office window as Grace moved around the floor, checking files or talking with a coworker. Sometimes he saw her smile, and it made him wonder how someone who had gone through so much could still carry light inside her. One morning, he found her waiting outside his office with a folder in her hands. "I finished sorting the donation requests," she said, a little nervous. He smiled. "You didn't have to do that so quickly." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "So I thought I'd get ahead on work." He motioned for her to sit. "You're doing really well here, you know." She smiled softly. "I'm just grateful to be here. I haven't had a reason to wake up early in a long time. Now I do." Daniel nodded, understanding more than she realized. "It's funny," he said after a pause. "Sometimes giving someone a chance ends up helping both people." She looked at him curiously. "You mean me helping you?" He chuckled. "In a way, yes. This company used to be all numbers and reports. Now there's laughter in the hallways again. People are smiling. That's not because of me. It's because of you. Grace blushed, lowering her eyes. I just try to be kind. People forget how far kindness can go. He watched her for a moment before replying quietly, You reminded me. They spoke for a while longer, mostly about work, but there was a new warmth between them, a quiet understanding that went beyond their roles. Later that day, while she was organizing files, she found a framed photo on Daniel's shelf that caught her attention. It showed a little girl with big brown eyes and a bright smile. Your daughter? She asked. He nodded, a gentle smile touching his face. Lily, she's 6. She looks like you, Grace said. Beautiful smile. She got that from her mother, he replied softly. The room fell silent for a moment. Grace sensed the weight behind his words. She didn't ask questions, but Daniel spoke anyway. My wife passed away 5 years ago, he said quietly. It's just been me and Lily since then. I'm sorry, she whispered. He nodded, his eyes distant. That's partly why I threw myself into work. It was easier than facing the quiet at home. Grace looked at him with gentle understanding. I know what that feels like, and trying to fill the silence. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was something else. A small bridge between two people who had both known loss. From that day on, their conversations grew more natural. They shared lunch sometimes or a coffee during breaks. It wasn't personal at first, just small talk about the day, the weather, or Lily's latest art project. But slowly it became more, talks about life, regret, and hope. Daniel found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. Grace listened without judgment, and when she spoke, her words carried quiet wisdom. You know, she said one afternoon, sometimes the things we lose aren't really gone. They change shape. They live in the people we become. He thought about that for days. Outside of work, life seemed to brighten too. He started spending more time with Lily, taking her to the park, helping with her homework, cooking pancakes on Sundays. Grace had somehow reminded him that the simplest moments were the most valuable. One weekend, he brought Lily to the office again while he finished some reports. Grace was there, organizing donation forms for a charity drive. When Lily saw her, her face lit up. Hi, Miss Grace, she called. Grace laughed and knelt down. Hi there. You remembered my name? Of course. Daddy says you help everyone, Lily said proudly. Daniel smiled from across the room. Don't believe everything your dad says, Grace teased gently, making Lily giggle. They spent the afternoon together while Daniel worked. Grace helped Lily draw pictures on scrap paper, and by the time they were done, Lily had made a big card that said, Thank you for helping my dad smile again. When Daniel read it, his throat tightened. He didn't say much, and he just looked at Grace with quiet gratitude. She smiled back, understanding everything he didn't say. Over the next few months, Grace's life began to rebuild piece by piece. She found a small apartment near the office, nothing fancy but warm and safe. Daniel helped her move in, carrying boxes and fixing a leaky faucet. This place has character, he joked. It has walls and a door that locks, she said with a smile. That's more than I had before. He laughed softly, and for a moment they just stood there in the quiet room, surrounded by the sound of a new beginning. That night, when he got home, Daniel realized he hadn't felt this kind of peace in a long time. As the weeks turned into months, Grace became a familiar part of his world. They had coffee every morning in the break room. She always asked about Lily, and sometimes she'd bring small things for her. A handmade bookmark, a paper flower, a cookie wrapped in a napkin. One day, Grace suggested something that would soon change both their lives even more. I was thinking, she said as they walked through the office, what if we expanded the company's charity program? Instead of just writing checks, we could actually help people, real people, who need a chance. Daniel stopped walking. What do you mean? I mean hiring people like me, she said softly. People who just need someone to believe in them. We could give them short-term jobs, training, maybe even housing assistance. He thought about it. It wasn't a business idea. It was a human one, and it made perfect sense. I like it, he said after a moment. Let's do it, Grace blinked. Just like that, he smiled. Just like that. Together, they began building a new branch of the company's charity program, one focused on employment opportunities for people in need. Grace worked tirelessly, reaching out to shelters and organizations, using her own story to inspire others. She never boasted about what she had been through, but when people learned her story, it gave them hope. Soon, the office became a place where second chances were more than words on paper. People started donating clothes, organizing food drives, and volunteering on weekends. And through it all, Daniel watched Grace, her dedication, her heart, her quiet humility. The woman who had once searched for food in a trash bin was now helping others find a new start. One evening, as they reviewed paperwork together, Daniel said, "You know, when I met you that night, I thought I was helping you, but I think you've helped me more." Grace looked up surprised. "How?" "You reminded me what life is about. Not money, not success. Just people caring for each other." "I had forgotten that," she smiled softly. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what really matters." The silence that followed was gentle. They didn't need to say more. After that night, their connection deepened in quiet ways. They laughed more easily, shared stories, and began to understand each other's unspoken thoughts. Daniel's daughter adored Grace. Every time Lily visited, she'd run straight to her office. Grace would sit her on her lap and listen to her endless stories about school, friends, and dreams. "Do you ever get tired of me talking?" Lily asked one day. "Never," Grace said with a laugh. "I think you have a storyteller's heart." Daniel stood at the door, smiling as he watched them. There was something healing about seeing his daughter so happy, and realizing that he was happy too. Life had become quieter but fuller. Grace's presence had filled the empty spaces in his home and heart, without either of them noticing when it happened. Sometimes, he wondered if their meeting that snowy night had really been a coincidence, or something meant to be. As spring approached, the charity program they'd built together began to draw attention. Local news stations wanted interviews, but Grace always declined. "I don't want people to see me," she said. "I just want them to see the hope." And that was exactly what people saw. One afternoon, Daniel stood by his office window, watching the staff load boxes of supplies into vans for the new outreach project. Grace stood among them, laughing, organizing, her hair catching the sunlight. He thought about the woman he'd met months ago, kneeling by a trash bin in the snow. And then he thought about the woman she was now, strong, kind, and full of life. Something inside him whispered that this was only the beginning. As he turned back to his desk, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Lily says tell Miss Grace she made her a drawing." Daniel smiled. He looked out the window again, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. Kindness had changed everything. And sometimes, that's all it takes to rewrite two lives forever. The weeks after that night passed quickly. The city was still cold, but for Grace, everything felt different now. She woke up in a warm bed each morning, took a shower with running water, and looked at herself in the mirror like she was seeing a new person. The woman staring back wasn't lost anymore. She had hope, and that changed everything. Daniel had spoken to his HR team as promised, and within a week, Grace was called in for an interview. She was nervous that morning. Her hands shook as she fixed her hair in front of the small mirror at the inn. She wore a simple blouse she had found in a donation box, pressed it carefully, and took a deep breath before heading out. When she entered Daniel's company building, she couldn't help but feel small. The glass doors, shining floors, and people in suits made her heart race. But when Daniel saw her, he smiled warmly and said, "You're early. That's a good sign." He introduced her to a woman from the HR team who was kind and soft-spoken. They talked about her past experience, her nursing background, and the volunteer work she had done before things fell apart. Grace answered every question honestly. She didn't try to hide what she had been through. She knew that if she wanted a fresh start, it had to begin with truth. A few days later, she received a call offering her a job in the company's health department as an assistant. It wasn't a big position, but to Grace it meant everything. For the first time in years, she had a real job, a place to belong, and a reason to wake up with purpose. Daniel watched quietly as she settled into her new role. He didn't treat her differently from anyone else. He respected her, gave her space, and checked in from time to time just to make sure she was doing okay. What surprised him most was how well she fit in. People liked her gentle nature. She listened to everyone, never complained, and always helped when someone needed it. One afternoon, as Daniel was walking through the office, he saw Grace helping a younger employee who had just joined. She was explaining how to fill out reports properly, patient and calm. He stood there for a moment, smiling. It was hard to believe that just weeks ago, this same woman had been searching for food in a trash bin on Christmas Eve. Later that week, Daniel's daughter, Lily, came to visit him at work. She was full of energy, always curious, and she loved exploring her father's office. When Grace saw her, she knelt down and smiled. "You must be Lily," she said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." Lily grinned. "He talks about you too. He said you're really nice." Grace laughed shyly, not knowing what to say. The two quickly became friends. Lily would stop by Grace's desk whenever she visited and share stories about school or drawings she made. Daniel noticed how happy his daughter looked around her, and for the first time in a long while, he saw a kind of warmth returning to his home. One evening, Daniel invited Grace to have dinner with him and Lily. It was a simple meal, pasta and salad, but the atmosphere felt cozy. Lily kept asking questions, and Grace answered everyone with a smile. They laughed about silly things, and Daniel found himself laughing too, something he hadn't done in months. After dinner, while Lily was in her room drawing, Daniel and Grace sat in the living room. The fireplace flickered softly, and a comfortable silence filled the room. "I don't know how to thank you," Grace said quietly. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has." Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. You earned everything. I just opened a door. You walked through it," she smiled, her eyes glistening. "Still, I'll never forget it." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "before that night I thought money could fix everything. But now I see that kindness means a lot more." Grace nodded. Sometimes all people need is someone who believes in them. Their eyes met for a moment, and though neither said a word, something quiet and meaningful passed between them. It wasn't romance. It was deeper than that. It was understanding, trust, and shared humanity. As the months went by, Grace continued to grow at work. Her dedication caught the attention of other managers, and soon she was promoted to a higher role, helping manage health programs within the company. She started suggesting ideas for community outreach, small clinics, mental health support, and donation drives. Daniel loved the way she thought beyond herself. Meanwhile, Daniel's relationship with his daughter grew stronger too. He made time for her, picked her up from school, and spent weekends at home. Grace often joined them on outings, sometimes to the park, sometimes just for ice cream. To Lily, Grace became like family. She called her Aunt Grace, and Grace's heart melted every time she heard it. One weekend, the company organized a charity event to help homeless families. Grace was in charge of planning it. When she stood on stage that day, speaking about second chances, everyone listened. Her voice was calm but powerful. She didn't share her personal story, but her words carried the weight of someone who understood what struggle felt like. Daniel stood in the crowd, proud and moved. After the event, several people approached Grace to thank her for inspiring them. She smiled politely, but inside her heart was full. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere again. That evening, Daniel found her sitting alone in the company garden. "You did amazing today," he said. Grace smiled softly. "I was just thinking. A year ago, I didn't even know where I'd sleep. And now?" She paused, taking a deep breath. "Now I'm here. It doesn't feel real sometimes." Daniel sat beside her. "You worked for this. You should be proud." She nodded. "I am, but I'm also grateful. You changed my life, Daniel." He shook his head. "No, Grace, you changed mine." She looked at him, puzzled. "How?" "For a long time," he said slowly, "I thought I had everything. The business, the house, the cars. But I was empty inside. I missed my wife, but I buried myself in work instead of healing. When I met you, I realized life isn't about what we own. It's about who we help, who we care for." Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe we both needed each other," he smiled. "Maybe we did." From that day on, they worked closely together on several community projects. Grace brought empathy and understanding. Daniel brought resources and leadership. Together, they made a strong team, one built not on wealth but on kindness and purpose. Months turned into a full year, and soon Christmas was around the corner again. The city streets were decorated with lights, and music filled the air. Daniel and Grace organized a special event to distribute warm meals and blankets to families in need. Lily helped pack gifts, running around the office excitedly. The night before Christmas Eve, Grace stayed late to finalize everything. When she walked out of the building, Daniel was waiting by his car. "Need a ride home?" he asked. She smiled. "You always seem to show up at the right time," he laughed. "Maybe I just know when someone deserves a little help." They drove through the city, passing streets full of lights and laughter. Grace looked out the window, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 year. The last Christmas Eve she had been cold, hungry, and hopeless. Now she was warm, cared for, and ready to help others find hope too. When they reached her small apartment, she turned to him and said, "Thank you again, for everything." Daniel smiled. "I think we both learned something from each other. You reminded me what Christmas is really about." She nodded. "Kindness." "Exactly." They said goodnight, and as Grace walked up the steps to her home, she felt tears in her eyes. Not of sadness, but of peace. She had come full circle. That Christmas, she spent the day with Daniel and Lily, decorating the tree and cooking together. Laughter filled the house, and for the first time in years, there were no shadows of the past, only warmth and light. Daniel watched Grace and Lily laughing together, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: complete. It wasn't about romance or charity. It was about connection. Two people from different worlds had found meaning through kindness, and their lives were forever changed. As snow began to fall outside the window, Daniel thought back to that night a year ago. The woman by the trash bin, the quiet diner, and the decision that changed everything. It reminded him how small actions can have the biggest impact. Sometimes life brings people together for reasons we don't understand right away. But when kindness leads the way, it always creates something beautiful. And that's exactly what had happened. Two lives rebuilt. One act of compassion at a time. A year had passed since that cold Christmas Eve when Daniel found Grace outside the diner. So much had changed since then that sometimes it felt like a dream neither of them wanted to wake up from. The city was glowing with Christmas lights again. Every street corner shimmered, and the air carried the soft scent of pine and cinnamon. People rushed with gifts in their hands, laughter echoing through the evening chill. But this Christmas felt different for both of them. Not because of gifts or decorations, but because of everything they had built together. Grace was now managing the charity branch of Daniel's company. What started as a small idea had turned into something bigger. A program that helped homeless families find shelter, food, and work. Every week she met people who reminded her of who she used to be, tired, hungry, and lost. And she made sure no one left feeling unseen. Daniel had changed too. The man who once spent most nights buried in work now spent them with his daughter, laughing, cooking, or watching old movies together. He still ran his business, but now he ran it with purpose. He didn't just want to grow his company. He wanted to make a difference. That December morning, Daniel stood by the window of his office watching the snow fall softly outside. Grace knocked lightly and stepped in, holding a stack of papers. "I think we're ready for tonight," she said with a smile. "The food is packed, the volunteers are confirmed, and the hall's been decorated." Daniel turned to her, smiling back. "You've done an amazing job again, Grace," she laughed. "We've done it together," he nodded. "Yes, we have." It was their second annual Christmas dinner for those in need, something that had become a tradition in the company now. Last year, they had served over 100 people. This year, they expected double that number. That evening, as the sun dipped and the sky turned a deep blue, the hall filled with people. Volunteers moved around with trays of warm food, children laughed near the Christmas tree, and soft music played in the background. Grace stood at the entrance, greeting every person who came in. Some were shy, some teary-eyed, but all of them looked grateful to be there. Daniel watched her from across the room. He couldn't help but smile at how natural she was in this role, gentle, patient, full of warmth. It was hard to imagine that the woman standing there, comforting a crying child, had once been the one searching for food herself. Later that night, when the hall had quieted down and most of the guests had left, Grace sat with Daniel and Lily at one of the tables. Lily had spent the entire evening handing out small gift bags she had prepared with her friends. Her face was glowing with happiness. "Dad," she said, "this was the best Christmas ever." Daniel smiled. "It's not even over yet." Grace chuckled softly. You did a wonderful job, Lily. Everyone loved your gifts. Lily grinned proudly. Next year I want to make even more. Maybe we can add toys for the little kids too. That's a great idea, Daniel said, giving her a wink. After a while, Lily dozed off in her chair, her head resting on Daniel's arm. Grace looked at her and whispered, "She's such a bright girl. You've done a great job with her." Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his daughter's face. "I'm trying, but she's the one teaching me things now." Grace looked around the empty hall, still warm with the spirit of the evening. "You know," she said softly, "a year ago, I didn't think I'd ever have a night like this again. Back then, I thought life had forgotten me." Daniel turned toward her. "And now?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "Now I know life never forgets us. Sometimes it just waits for us to find the right people." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad our paths crossed that night." "So am I," she whispered. They sat there in silence for a while, just listening to the faint sound of snow hitting the windows. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that comes between people who understand each other deeply, without needing to fill the space with words. When they finally got up to leave, Daniel offered to drive her home. The city looked peaceful under the falling snow. The roads were quiet, the lights soft and golden. Grace looked out of the window, watching the snowflakes drift past. "I remember last Christmas Eve," she said after a while. "I was sitting outside that diner, cold and hungry, and then you showed up." She turned to him, her voice gentle. "That night changed everything for me." Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his voice quiet. "It changed me too. I think in a way we both saved each other." Grace smiled. "Maybe that's how life works. Sometimes we help someone else without realizing we're helping ourselves too." When he dropped her off, she thanked him and wished him good night. But before she went inside, she turned back and said, "You know, Daniel, you should be proud of yourself. You didn't just build a company. You built something that gives people hope." He smiled softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Grace shook her head. "Maybe not, but it takes courage to care, and you have that." He watched her walk into her apartment building, the snow falling gently around her. For a moment, he just sat there thinking about how much could change in a single year, not just for her, but for him too. The next morning was Christmas Day. Lily woke him up early, jumping on his bed, shouting, "It's Christmas!" "It's Christmas." Daniel laughed and got up to help her open the presents under the tree. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door. When Daniel opened it, Grace stood there holding a plate covered with foil. "I brought breakfast," she said, smiling. "I thought maybe we could celebrate together this year." Lily ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Yay, Aunt Grace is here." They spent the morning together, eating, laughing, and talking. Grace had made pancakes, and Lily insisted on decorating them with strawberries and chocolate syrup. After breakfast, they sat by the fireplace, and Lily handed Grace a small, wrapped box. "I made this for you," she said proudly. Grace opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny bracelet made of colorful beads. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of love. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you, sweetheart," Lily grinned. "Now we all have something matching." She showed her own wrist. She and Daniel had made similar bracelets together. Daniel looked at Grace, smiling. "Looks like you're officially part of the family now." Grace laughed, wiping her eyes. "I couldn't ask for a better one." The rest of the day passed in peace. They watched movies, cooked dinner together, and told stories. There were no expensive gifts, no big parties, just warmth, laughter, and love. That evening, Daniel and Grace stepped outside for a walk while Lily played with her new toys. The sky was filled with stars, and the snow crunched softly beneath their feet. "Do you ever think about the future?" Daniel asked quietly. Grace smiled. "All the time, but not the way I used to. I don't worry about what's coming anymore. I just try to be thankful for what I have right now." He nodded. "That's a good way to live." She looked at him, her eyes calm and kind. "You've given me a new beginning, Daniel, and I want to keep giving that chance to others. I think that's what life is all about, passing on the kindness we've received." Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "You already are. You've touched so many lives this year." She smiled softly. "And it started because you stopped that night instead of driving away." He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "I think fate had a plan for us both." The wind was cold, but neither of them felt it. They stood there for a while, watching the snow fall, feeling grateful for everything that had led them to this moment. As they walked back toward the warm light of the house, Daniel realized something. All the years he had spent chasing success, all the nights he had spent alone had led to this. A life filled with meaning. Grace realized it too. She no longer saw herself as the woman who had lost everything, but as someone who had rebuilt her life with kindness and courage. When they stepped back inside, Lily ran up and hugged them both. "This is the best Christmas ever," she said, her face glowing with joy. Daniel laughed and hugged her back. "Yes, it is." Grace smiled, her heart full. "And the best part," she said softly, "is that it's only the beginning." Outside, the snow kept falling, silent and peaceful, covering the world in white. A reminder that every story, no matter how broken it begins, can find its way to light again. And on that quiet Christmas night, 3 hearts, once lonely, once lost, found a home in each other's kindness. Because sometimes, one small act of compassion doesn't just change a moment, it changes lives forever.